This is Cawthon, the only player in Pokemon TCG history to ever qualify for every single World Championships. This past weekend, he proved that he still has what it takes. At the North American International Championships, one of the largest events of the year with over 3,700 players, Ross managed to finish in the top 4 with Slowking, a deck that a lot of people kind of had under the radar. And when I say that, I mean that most people don't really consider this one of the best decks in the room. Still a strong choice, but definitely not the best. And if you've never played against this deck, or you haven't seen the Slowking deck and you look at this deck list for the first time, you might be wondering, how does this even work? But I promise you, it doesn't take rocket science to figure it out.
I'm a doctoral student studying astronomy and astrophysics. I just love figuring out the solution to different mysteries, whether that's figuring out what the best deck in Pokemon is to win the next major event, or what's going on in the universe.
Okay, maybe it does. Slowking is a deck that for the longest time has not been good whatsoever in the Pokemon TCG. It's a single prize deck, it has its flaws, it's never been a great deck up until recently. Leading up to NAIC, we did have a special event in Italy, which was the first official major tournament in the new Chaos Rising format. And to everybody's surprise, Slowking managed to find its way in the finals against a deck that was even more of a surprise, Hops Trevenant. Now I could talk about the Hops Trevenant deck, but we'll save that for another video. Today we're talking about Slowking, and specifically Cawthon's run here, and also why this deck got so much better. With the really high placement of Slowking at the special event in Italy, it was kind of becoming a deck on everybody's radar leading into NAIC. And the big question for a lot of people was, should they have answers to this deck specifically, or should they just not respect it? Now for us to understand how to respect Slowking, we have to understand what the deck does in the first place. And with this deck, Slowking is your main attacker with the Seek Inspiration attack, which reads, you can discard the top card of your deck, and if that card is a Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box, you get to choose one of its attacks and use it as this attack. So essentially the reason why this deck is strong is because we can use Slowking as our attacker for 2 energies to copy attacks that are usually much more hard to set up. Most of these lists are running Mega Kangaskhan as a card to just help you draw cards and kind of help get set up early on in the game. We can couple that with Latias EX to give ourselves free retreat on basic Pokemon. And because we play Latias EX and Slowpokes, which are both Psychic type Pokemon, we did get a big buff with the Telepathic Energy, which you can attach to a Psychic type Pokemon to bench 2 more basic Psychic type Pokemon. So essentially if we get a Slowpoke down, we can attach the energy and put down another Slowpoke and a Latias, which was one of the biggest buffs for this deck to help it be more consistent. But there's really 2 attackers in this deck that make it so good, and one of them came with the Chaos Rising format, which has a technicality that just kind of works in Slowking's favor. The first big attacker here, and the reason why a lot of people consider teching for Slowking, is because of Kyurem, which has a ridiculous energy cost, but again, we're just copying the attack, not the energy cost associated with that attack. We've got the Trifrost attack here, which forces us to discard all of our energy, but we get to do 110 damage to 3 of our opponent's Pokemon. This is a very strong attack for a lot of reasons. You can probably guess why. In the Pokemon TCG, you need 6 prize cards to win. This right here will typically give you 3 prize cards. You're already halfway to winning the game off of 1 attack. And when the most popular deck in the room is Dragapult, and Dragapult takes time to set up, and you can just one-shot all of their basics or stage 1s, you're pretty much in a good spot. The other big attacker for this deck that came in the Chaos Rising set was the Metagross here, which has the Metallic Hammer attack for 150 damage. And when you read the attack here, it says you may discard 3 Metal Energy from this Pokemon and have it do 150 more damage. Now at first glance, it looks like you might have to have Metal Energies to be able to use this attack, but with the way it's worded, we're able to just hit for 300 if we choose so. Because it says we may discard 3 Metal Energies and we get to do 150 more damage. So technically we may discard them, we don't have to, and we get to do 150 more damage. So technically we can do 300 damage. Very weird ruling, weird way to kind of read the card, but I promise you, you can hit for 300 with this Pokemon. Or in this case with Slowking, I guess. Now aside from these 2, Ross also decided to play the Zeraora here, which was a very unpopular pick for Slowking, but I can see why it's definitely a really good card. It's got the Thunder Raid attack, which allows you to do 210 damage to one of our opponent's benched Pokemon EX. And the reason why this is so good is because the one card that kind of stops Slowking, if you decide to play it or not, is Shaman. And Shaman has the Flower Curtain ability, which prevents all damage done to your bench Pokemon that don't have a rule box. So this is kind of an answer to help deal with Shaman, because Shaman only protects Pokemon that don't have a rule box, which means that Pokemon like Meowth EX, Fezandipiti EX are all vulnerable to benched damage. And with Kyurem, you're forced to discard all your energies, kind of putting you behind, and it's not really worth it if you're not one-shotting Pokemon all the time. But Zeraora is kind of a good answer for it, because you still have to discard your energies, but now you're hitting for way more damage, 210, and you can get guaranteed one-shot one-shots on some of these EX Pokemon that are in every single deck like Fezandipiti or Meowth EX. And right now there's no way to protect them on the bench. And a lot of times when you're playing up against Dragapult, they're kind of forced to bench a Meowth to be able to play the game, or they bench a Fezandipiti at some point in the game. It just kind of opens up more doors for you and allows you to take 2 prizes at any point. It's honestly a really good answer, and it's not something that we see in every Slowking list. And what's even more interesting about Ross's list here is that he only went with 2 different supporters, essentially saying that, hey, every single game I know what I want to be able to draw cards, and I want to be able to set up my cards to draw exactly what I need. We've got Lillie's Determination to draw cards, and Ciphermaniac to be able to stack 2 cards on top of our deck and draw them with Kangaskhan. Outside of that, the deck list is very consistent. There's a lot of just good consistency cards in this list. We've got lots of energies here. We got the Telepathics, which are very strong, our basic Psychic Energies, and also the Boomerang Energies, which allow us to reattach the energies after they've been discarded. And I forgot to mention this is very important for Slowking, but the stadium of choice is obviously Academy at Night, where every single turn you're allowed to place a card from your hand onto the top of your deck. Essentially, you get the attacker that you want, and towards the end of your turn, you put it on top of your deck. Whenever you use Seeking Inspiration, you obviously draw the card that you just put there and you can use that attack. And looking at the tournament as a whole, Slowking was obviously a very solid meta choice. Aside from Shaman itself, there's really not a whole lot of decks that just outright beat Slowking right now that are actually competitive decks. Dragapult being 48% of the meta share in day 2 meant that if you had a good Dragapult matchup, you were in for a good time. And with a lot of the top Dragapult players, a lot of people did not really necessarily respect Slowking going into the events, or if they did, they just thought they had answers outside of Shaman. Shaman is a card you don't necessarily want to include because it's really only useful in certain matchups, and it feels bad to play a dead card in 10 out of your 14 rounds when you only need it for a couple of rounds, and sometimes you can still beat those decks without Shaman. And funny enough, with how Ross built his deck, he was able to still beat a lot of Shamans over the weekend. 2 out of his first 3 opponents were both playing Shaman, and he beat both of them. So again, I think the Zeraora was definitely a strong inclusion, a card that we don't really see too often in Slowking, but it makes a lot of sense as to why it's there. Now moving forward, I think Slowking is in a very good spot within the meta. It's a single prize deck at the end of the day, and yeah, it does lose to decks that play Shaman most of the time, but it has a lot of ways to kind of beat those decks. And what we saw at NAIC is that a lot of Slowking players were playing all different types of lists. When you compare Ross's list to somebody like Ian Robb, it looks completely different. They have completely different ideas, and both actually worked pretty well. And that's what's so unique about this deck, is that you can really use any attacker within the deck, so there are ways to kind of answer the meta depending on how it evolves. If people are playing Shaman, we can add cards like Zeraora to still be able to bench snipe. And depending on which decks are good in the meta, we can add certain attackers to help deal with those specific matchups. And I think as more sets come out, this deck will just continue to get better. It has gotten the buffs that it needs to be a viable deck. With Telepathic Energy and Metagross, it is definitely a viable deck, and it's only going to gain more attackers as more sets drop and more Pokemon get released. Even though I'm not a believer in playing Shaman myself, I do respect Slowking, and I think you have to have an answer to this matchup. Congratulations to Ross on the top 4 finish. Very impressive with a deck like this. Let me know in the comments what your biggest surprise at NAIC was. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.